This is Chris Lytle, and you're listening to Championship on the Line podcast with Rich and Alex.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You are now listening to the Championship on the Line podcast. I'm Alex.
Hey guys, I'm Rich.
And this is a special episode of Knockout. We have a special guest here today. He is a UFC veteran, and he is Chris Lights Out Lytle. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming on the pod.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me.
So, how's life been with COVID happening? How's everything going with you?
Things are going pretty well right now. I've been pretty fortunate. Never really stopped training too much. I mean, our gym was kind of closed to the general public, but some of the people who were still competing and everything, I was kind of one of the coaches, so I was able to come in and work out with guys. And luckily, we've been able to do a little bit more of the bare knuckle. I'm one of the commentators for the BKFC right now, so still continuing to do that. We lost a few fights, obviously, but we're kind of back at it right now. We just had our last fight not too long ago of the year.
I know.
Good times.
I know, it's been awesome. It's awesome. Like, I'm a huge fan of the bare knuckle fighting championship. They put on really great fights. What is your thoughts on them, and do you believe that they're the future of combat sports?
In many ways I do. I've talked about this several times, and one thing that I think has a big appeal to it. When I first heard bare knuckle, I thought the same thing. Everybody was like, what is wrong with people doing bare knuckle boxing? And I kind of watched some, and I got about halfway through with the fight, and I decided right then and there, I was like, okay, I got to get a hold of these people and compete once, because it wasn't what it sounded like, I was like, okay, I was thinking people in some warehouse, fighting it, but no, this was like legitimate in a ring, so okay, I had to try it. Now, the thing that I really like about it, and I think the thing that people will like about it is, it reminds me of the I don't know how to exactly describe it, not the rawness and not just the nuances of it when the UFC first started. As far as, it was, one thing that people really liked about it was a fight, It wasn't necessarily just an athletic contest. It was a fist fight, It was pretty raw, and it was just who the other guy wanted to go out and take the other guy out. Now, a lot of times now when it comes to the UFC or even like a boxing match, it seems like you have a lot of people who want to go out there and, there's a lot of money on the line. They're trying to work their way up to the title. They're going to try and take the guy down and hold him. They're going to try and, out jab him and move. They're not necessarily there to knock a guy's head off. You get in the bare knuckle, though, it's people still trying to hit each other hard and take the people out. I mean, it's what it's all about. It's not about much finesse. It's about, I'm going to be the toughest guy and I'm going to knock this guy out. So I think that aspect of it where people are still really going to enjoy it. You go in there and it's not an athletic contest. It's a fight. And I think that it's going to have that appeal for a long time because, to be honest with you, boxing lost out in general a while ago. The UFC has too. I mean, it's still there some, but not all the time. But that is still what you get when you watch bare knuckle. It's two guys in there or ladies or whoever, two people wanting to take each other's heads off. And there's just something about it that I think people like. So, I mean, very entertaining to me, and I think it will have a very good future. I'm not saying it will take over, UFC or it'll take over boxing, but it'll be in there to be in the conversation of something people like to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty awesome. Like, what I love about it has like that old school UFC, like #1, like feeling to it,
Exactly.
And you fought for them a couple of times. Are you gonna fight again for them, or are you done with bare knuckle?
I mean, I'm probably not. Just I'm getting older right now. I know I had wrist surgery after my last fight, and I never really got back to where I wanted to. But I mean, I'm enjoying doing the commentary for them. I ended up with 3 bare knuckle fights, but I mean, I guess there's always a possibility, but I tap that pretty quick because my age isn't getting any younger. Father Time is undefeated when it comes to fighting. I've realized that. So I'm pretty happy doing the commentary for them right now. But I always get the itch, but I'm trying to be smart and just hard to. The weird thing is it's not even really hard to fight. I think it's hard to train. Multiple days in a row. I'm like, I go in and one day I train, I feel great. I go in the next day, I'm like, I hurt. And then I can't do 3 days in a row. I mean, and the only way I've ever known how to fight is to train like real hard every day, you know. And unless you're willing to take a bunch of growth hormone or take stuff I don't even know what they take, I don't know. But if you're not willing to do that, yeah, I don't know how you can fight when you get 46, you know.
Yeah, I mean, because I saw your last two fights with them, and man, you still look great. You know, you still fight awesome.
It. I mean, I've always taken care of myself, and I've always working out. But like I said, luckily, I mean, if I am going to do anything, the only thing I could possibly do would be bare knuckle, because, you know, it is so much easier to do the training camp for this than it was to do MMA. I mean, you know, I go in there, I jump rope, I shadow box, I'd hit the mitts for a little bit, maybe spar, and then you're done. I mean, that's just the first, you know, third or fourth of your practice in MMA. Then you have to do wrestling, then you have to do grappling, then you have to do so much, and it's so hard on your body. But I mean, bare knuckle is so much easier to train for, I would say, you know, and you just have to do, like you said, the workout I just talked about, and maybe do like some cardio. It's so, and it's only 10 minutes, really. I mean, it's 5 2-minute rounds. I could, you know, I could muster up enough to get by for that possibly, but, you know, I'm just trying to be a little smarter than not do too much anymore. But I mean, I don't know. That's the only thing I think has really good appeal for people, especially older fighters. You know, guys who've been fighting for a long time. It's like, it's just so much easier on my body. I mean, MMA is a brutal sport. It will hurt you in the long run as far as shoulders, knees, back. There's all kinds of problems. You know, this is a lot easier.
Yeah. That's awesome. Like, and then also like you're doing both, because you're fighting UFC, you're doing MMA, but you also had a boxing career. So how did you do both at the same time?
Well, it was tough for a while. I mean, you know, just trying to schedule fights and do different training camps. But unfortunately for me, when I got on the Ultimate Fighter, you know, 2006, I kind of made me sign a contract that said I wasn't going to do any more boxing. I was just kind of scheduled to the UFC. So ever since then, I really didn't do any more boxing. But until 2006, I was doing, you know, UFC fights and boxing, just whatever I could. But like I said, one thing I learned about that, it is, you know, about really setting up a camp and trying to peak at the right time. I mean, if you're fighting low-level guys, I could just go fight whenever I want and win. But when you're fighting top-level guys, you have to make it to where, you know, you have myself, I always had like a 6-week camp. And you have to make it to where you're peaking at the end of that 6-week camp. If you're taking fights there, you know, every 2 weeks, you just don't ever get a time to peak, and then you kind of flatten out at some point. You just don't really, you know, hit that high mark. And that's what I learned about, you know, you can't just take fights at any time. I did that once, and that was when I had my really only boxing loss. I just didn't peak at the right time. You know, it was like my third fight in like a couple months, and or 6 weeks, I can't remember. I just never really wasn't smart about it. So I just learned that's really what you have to do. You have to take every fight 100% serious, dedicated camp to it, and if not, you're going to suffer some losses.
Yeah, like when you're doing like boxing, what were your goals when you first started? Like, did you want to do it full time, or what were your goals at first?
No, man, my first time, people always thought I was a boxer that went to MMA. Like I did MMA. I fought UFC once back in like 2000. I was fighting in Japan, and I just wanted to improve my stand-up. So I started going to a boxing gym, and they, you know, the guy there, he said at one point, I'd probably only been there like 2 months or a month and a half or something. He called me once. He's like, "Hey, man, I got a pro boxing match if you'd be interested." I was like, "What?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's next week, and it's on an ESPN2 card." I was like, "All right, I'll do it." And they were basically just looking for a guy to fight one of the local guys. I was fighting some Indian guy on the Indian reservation, you know, and they were like, "Yeah, we'll throw him in there." And then the guy from Top Rank who kind of set the fight was like, "Man, I really like, you were supposed to come in here and get beat up. It didn't happen like that. We like you. Would you like to do more?" I was like, "Hell yeah." So they started giving me more boxing matches.
And that's pretty cool. Like because you're also the Indiana Boxing Association Lightweight Champion. What did that title mean to you at that point in your career?
It meant a lot to me because, you know, it's like I would have been known as the MMA guy before that in my state, you know, and the boxers thought, you know, he's a ground guy, whatever. And then I started doing their sport and started beating everybody at boxing, and then had a couple big matchups there, and against some of the guys who are supposed to be pretty good boxers, and I'm, not only beating them, but I'm knocking some of them out. So there's like, man, you didn't hear much from him after that. You know what I mean? It was like, all right, we're going to keep quiet about this guy. And then, it was just, it was good. Made me feel good about, being able to go in there and competing, both sports. Like I said, those guys, that's all they did. They'd go to the boxing. I'd do that, and then I'd go do some grappling, and then I'd go do other stuff and, do some wrestling practice. Like, I was even dedicating all my time to that, and I was still doing well at it.
Yeah, and you had a successful boxing career. Do you think when it comes to MMA fighters fighting boxers, do you think boxers underestimate them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they think that, to be honest, it's just a different kind of stand-up, coming from different angles. It's just a little bit different. Now, we've had a couple guys I know where I live in Indiana, and there's been some decent boxers, guys who are, and I'll be looking at the record. I'm like, what's the record? 9-1, 10-1. I'm like, who's the one lost to? Some MMA guy. And it's just, the MMA guy wasn't a better boxer. They were just tougher. It's like they would walk through punches, and they would just throw from odd angles, and they would rough the boxers up. The boxer, like, what the hell's going on? This isn't boxing. Like, no, this is boxing. You guys are just, kind of almost point fighters. They get real good, that amateur style where you're, they're not used to getting roughed up. And when they get roughed up and just get hit hard with these just MMA style, there's brutes in a way. It's like it's a boxer versus a brawler. They're not used to brawlers anymore in boxing, it seems like. Mm-hmm. And you get a brawler, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, my God, what is happening here? No, this is raw toughness that the MMA world brings that you guys are nothing used to right now. So I just think that's kind of helped a lot of the MMA guys who have done boxing. They have a huge toughness advantage, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you're right when you say it in boxing, especially now, you don't see a lot of brawlers, or it's just mostly guys that move around, they box,
Yeah, which is fine, but get in there with a brawler, you're in for a different time.
Oh, absolutely. And when you were boxing, was there anyone that you looked up to, any person that you studied film on?
I don't know if I'd say I studied film on, but I was always a huge boxing fan. I was a big Roy Jones fan. I was a big Arturo Gatti fan. I just really enjoyed, I really liked, Roy was just a guy who was just phenomenal to watch, but I knew I could never I couldn't really learn much from him because he was just so unique and so athletically gifted and talented. Unless you just have that same athletic gift, which I do not, it doesn't help. But I really enjoyed Arturo Gatti. He was a guy who really impressed me with his ability to be a skilled fighter, but yet he didn't. I wouldn't say that he didn't show it all the time, but he went after people. He tried to finish fights. He was known for his wars that he put on. But I remember in the third fight with Mickey Ward, he got hurt. He hurt his hand early in the fight. I think fourth round, and broke his hand, and proceeded to beat him with his left hand the rest of the fight. So it's like this dude had skill. He could have been a skilled fighter the whole time, but he mixed it up a lot. He did a lot of different things, and he got the knockout a lot. He was just so much fun and entertaining to watch. So, I tried to kind of mimic that. I wanted to be really good at being defensive and not being able to get hit, but at the same time, I want to hit people as hard as I can. So I had to work on being able to be offensive, but yet trying to be smart about it.
Oh yeah, I get that from you because I've been a fan of you for a very long time, and I always see every fight. You always come in aggressive, and you always mix it up, and you've always been exciting. I've been a fan when you watch your fights with Matt Serra, even your last fight with Dan Hardy. Always been a huge fan, and I'm still a big fan.
Well, thank you. Like I said, that was like, but I think you become the things that you like and what you want to be like. And just watching him, I was like, man, this dude is super skilled and super, elusive when he wants to be. But at the same time, he's not elusive to the point where, it's not all about, you don't get hit. It's about imposing your will on the other person. I've had some boxing matches or MMA fights or whatever, but my favorite kind of fight I've ever had is when you're in there with a really tough person and, you push them and basically you mentally break them. When you take some of their shots and you walk through them and you push them, you take their best and you can take it, and then they can't take your best. When you mentally break them like that, man, that's a good feeling. You're like, I just walked this guy down and he quit because he's not as tough as I am. I mean, they know it, and you know it, and pretty much not a better feeling than that. You know, I know Arturo Gatti got that. He's like, hey, I beat this guy at his game. I mean, that's just a good feeling, man. I mean, I love the fact of, fighting is about a lot of different things, but that's one of them is just, personal satisfaction and just, am I, as mentally tough as I think I am, and can I do whatever I really want to do? And that's just something where you're just like, there's not much of a better feeling than when you do something like that as a fighter.
Oh no, absolutely, I agree. It's the best feeling in any sport, because like I was an amateur boxer, so it's happened to me a few times, and there's no better feeling, especially when the guy quits and you're like, you made him quit, so like it's awesome. But I want to talk about when you had your first fight, and then you fought in Indiana, and then your second fight you fought in Japan. How did that come about?
Well, here's the thing. That's highly inaccurate because, the one thing was I was probably 10 fights in by the time I went to Japan. I know it says that on my record, but unfortunately they went back through at some point and they took all the fights that I had, and anyone that was in a quote-unquote non-sanctioned state at the time, they got rid of my record. So I probably had 15 fights. Unfortunately for me, they were all wins. So all these Midwestern fights I had back in 1998, all these different fights I had, they don't count anymore because they took them away because there was no sanctioned body. So I guess I don't know what they consider them, but so really I was 10-0 by the time I got to go to Japan.
Oh wow! So you had all this experience. So when you went to Pancreas, you were ready for it.
Well, yes and no. I thought I was ready for it. Like I said, I'd had 10 fights. So like, okay, I'm 10-0. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to do this. And I go over to Japan. And, I'd been training for about a year and a half, maybe a year. And it was just a little different because I'm training here probably 3 days a week, just with some buddies. We're going in there. And I go to Japan, and I was like, okay, 5,000 people there on TV, kids coming up asking for your autograph, being treated like a real professional sport. And that's kind of when I started realizing, these guys, they're in great shape. I came back and trained with them for about 6 weeks, and in the summertime, and I remember they were training, twice a day, 6 days a week. I was like, man, these guys, this is what you're supposed to be doing to be a real athlete. You know what I mean? It wasn't going in there Monday, Wednesday, Friday night and hanging with your buddies or whatever. These guys were doing it for real. So I thought I was ready. Then I got there. It was like, it's fighting-wise and ring experience kind of, but then I was fighting easy guys in the Midwest. These guys in Japan were all tough as nails. They were just battle tested, and they had a good system. They had the young boy system where you bring them up, and the older guys beat on them long enough until they were ready to fight. And that wasn't who I was fighting. I was fighting the veterans already. So they already had a good system of making their guys extremely tough and durable, and they all knew how to fight. And I was coming in as kind of a guy who had talent, but just hadn't fought at that level nearly as many times. So it was an eye-opening experience.
No, yeah, it definitely is. One thing I want to ask, a lot of former UFC fighters and fighters over the world have their rough stories about Japan. Some shady business. Either they change their opponent last minute, or not getting paid correctly. Did you have any rough experiences like that in Japan?
No, man. The Pancrase organization treated me fantastic. I mean, they were a different kind of business. They really took care of their fighters in a way. I mean, the pay wasn't great back then, but it was a very honorable organization. If they said you were going to get paid, this is what you got paid. As far as opponents, this is what it was. But the only thing I think everybody I knew over there felt like the judging wasn't as good. They felt like they gave them an unfair advantage, the people in Japan. But there's a couple things with that. I mean, anybody who's ever fought in anybody's hometown knows, just the way the crowd reacts, that affects judges. So I don't think it was underhand. I don't think it was anything they meant to do. Plus, I really think what they valued in Japan as far as the judges might not be the same in America, because Sam hitting a guy with more punches, but he's trying to do more moves. They're probably giving him more of an advantage now. In America, it's all about damage, not so much in Japan. So I think a lot of it was, looking back, I just didn't quite understand exactly what they valued as much, what was the point structure was about as much, and having them have, if I land a good kick on a guy and nobody cheers and he lands a kick and I block it mainly, but the crowd goes nuts, I mean, that does affect the judges. So I'd say that was the biggest complaint was the judges, and looking back, I mean, it wasn't, might not have been as bad as we thought,
Oh, yeah. I mean, with Japan and everything and in here, what was like the biggest difference competing in Japan and to the United States?
Oh man, just the respect that the crowd was very educated. They knew what was going on, and they were like respectful there. So during most of the time in a fight, you can't. I mean, there's not cheering. I mean, it's so weird. Like you can be in there fighting, and you can, when you watch, you can hear the fighters breathing, and you can hear your corner clearly because nobody's saying anything. Now, when something would start to happen, like an armbar would start to get put on, all of a sudden everybody started, and then they'd say somebody get real excited, and then it's like there'd be like a move in the action, and the person would get out, and then all of a sudden there'd be like claps for 5 seconds, and they cheer, and then they'd go back to quiet. It was like they knew what was going on. They were respectful about it, and then. There was no booing or kick his ass. It was just like, people were very respectful there, and they understood the sport. Unlike here at the time,
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've always had this conversation, with over here in the United States, the fans have always want knockouts or they want submissions, or most of the time it's just knockouts,
Yeah.
And they don't, I feel like they boo when it's like, like a takedown or something like that, or clinching.
Yeah.
And over there in Japan, they appreciate everything,
Well, like I said, they're very educated, and they would like a good match where people are going from submission to submission and showing the art form of trying to, the chess match that was going on, stand up on the ground. Here people just want more blood and gut. Like knock them out. They're booing when stuff happens, and being just there drinking like that. It wasn't like that there at all. It was more of a respectful thing, and they loved wars, but they like even the thing I love about there is like, let's say you had a fight where one guy he might be fighting the guy who weighs 80 pounds more than him. By the way, there was no weight class when I went over there. It was an open weight class. So, yeah, about everybody I thought was bigger than me. I could think of one guy who's bigger than him. Everybody was bigger than me. But, I mean, I did see one, I think a guy was 100 pounds bigger than another guy. But as long as the guy who was 100 pounds lighter went out there, he fought his ass off, he lost. But, I mean, the fans didn't care. It was that David versus Goliath, great match. And if you just went out there and fought your ass off and put on a good, great fight, show that, that warrior spirit, they loved you. That's all it really cared about. So, it like in America, it seems like it doesn't matter about that. If you lose, you're done. They don't care about you. It's win at all costs. And that's why you get some of these fights that become more boring here because you have to win. Doesn't matter if it's entertaining, you have to win. There, it wasn't. You had to entertain. And if you entertain, that was what people wanted to see. And they cared about it. It just seemed like I really liked this system. I mean, even when you could tell, look at the difference between, when Pride was there. I mean, they had a lot of guys who didn't win all their fights, but they were always over there because they always put on good fights and people loved them.
So you would say, like, over there in Japan, they more care about the entertainment instead of the win or lost records or anything like that?
Well, they cared more about the entertainment. Like, if you were an entertaining fighter, they liked you more. I mean, obviously, don't get me wrong. They wanted, you couldn't lose all the time, but I mean, it was more about if you were an entertaining fighter, they'd rather see that than a very boring good fighter who's going to take you down and hold you or just try and outpoint you and move and, throw kicks every now and again. If you were trying to not take people out, they liked you. And if not, they didn't.
Mm-hmm. When you look back with your career in Pancreas, which fight was memorable to you?
I remember when I fought a guy named Minowa. Minowa was a big kind of deal over there. I've seen him fight a few times. Like, this guy's pretty good. And I fought him over there when one where you were allowed to headbutt. And, anything would really win. There was it was old school, what I would call NHB, no holds barred rules. You can headbutt, you could kick a guy, knee a guy, to the head on the ground. You could pretty much do anything. So I remember I had a fight there with him, and that was one of my favorite ones, dude. And it was just a good fight, a lot of fun.
Oh yes, no, we're big Japanese MMA fans. But now, fast forwarding, how was it your second fight? You fought in the UFC versus Robbie Lawler. How was that fight and that experience?
Man, I love that one. It was because when I first fought in the UFC first time, it was SEG owned it, or it was before Zuffa and them bought it. So and Dana White was involved. So it was a different organization. I remember afterwards I go, that wasn't. This kind of sucks. I was like, they treat me better in Japan. Japan's better. The fans are better. I want to fight there. So I went back to Japan. So then Dana White and UFC got involved, or the Fertitta brothers. So once they bought it, I started looking at it like, hey, I kind of want to come back to Japan, or back to UFC. Because they turned it around. I liked it then. But back then, the UFC put on about 5 fights a year, and there was hard to get in back then. They only put on a few fights, and they had only so many fighters they could pick from, and they're like, hey, you're not part of our rotation. So then I had to work my way back in. I had to fight more and fight anybody I could in the Midwest and beat some high-level guys to get in there. So finally I get back in, and this time I want to fight. So they said, okay, they're going to give me Robbie Lawler, who I knew was one of their big guys. Like, all right, cool, and I remember, like, I went in there just reading some of the stuff, like 95% of the people polled were like, Lawler's going to knock this newcomer up, this Lytle guy thinks he's a boxer, and Lawler's going to knock him out. I was like, okay, cool, so I knew I was coming in there with, nothing to lose. I was the underdog, and I was fighting a young guy. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to take this guy into deep water and see what happens. I've seen him knock out some guys pretty quick, and, I love being more the underdog, and I think, really quick, in the fight, I think, he thought he was going to walk through me pretty quick, but then as the fight went on, I thought we put on a hell of a fight. It was a lot of fun, and I kind of changed everybody's opinion of me after that. Like, dude, this guy's pretty good, and he's not going to be taken out. That's not how this is going to go down. This guy's going to be here from the beginning to the end. He's going to put on a good fight no matter what. So I really like that fight because I ended up losing the decision, but it definitely changed the way everybody saw me. Especially the UFC. They're like, oh, dude, we want this guy to fight again. So really helped push me in the right direction.
No, yes, definitely. What do you, at the time fighting him, fast forward almost, 10, 15 years, did you think he was become, a UFC champion?
It was just hard to tell back then because he was pretty raw. Like, I knew he had talent. I knew he had ability. I knew he could hit hard. But, you never really know. Back then especially, I didn't know. He hadn't been fighting that long, so you don't know somebody's staying power. You don't know whether they're going to get hurt. You don't know whether in 3 years they're going to be like, this sport sucks. You just don't really know. He was a young kid who was full of talent and ability, but one injury or one little thing, you never really know what was going to happen from somebody. I knew he had the athletic ability. That was without a doubt. He had the strength. He could hit hard. He had good wrestling ability. So I knew he had that, but I really didn't know how far he'd climb. I knew he was an up and coming star at the time. And that was one of the reasons I was excited to get to fight him. I was wanting to derail that, but lots of decisions. So I was like, all right, maybe we'll run it back sometime. But we never did. But I just knew he had the ability to. But it was, it wasn't like you're like, oh man, this dude's the best guy I've ever fought. One like that is to, hey, this guy's just a strong kid with a lot of ability and unlimited potential. But we'll have to see how it develops because I think he's like 20 years old or 21 when I fought him. So it was a long time ago.
Oh yeah, also I want to talk about you also had a career in WEC. So how did that come about, and what was your experience like with WEC?
Well, back then, like I said, when you fought, they only put on about 5 or 6 fights a year. So you just couldn't only fight in the UFC. I remember I fought in the fought Robbie Lawler in 45, and then they go, okay, we want you to. Go ahead and grab another fight and, get another win, and you can go back and fight for us again. Okay. So I went and fought Pete Spratt, and I beat him, and then I go, okay. And they said, okay, we want you to fight for us again. And I did. And I fought in UFC 47. So I fought in 45, I fought again, and then I fought in 47. I only missed UFC 46. You know what I mean? So I fought 3 times. They just didn't put on a lot of fights. Is my point. So you couldn't fight for them 3 or 4 times a year. That was just not realistic because there wasn't enough space for everybody. So everybody had to fight outside the UFC in addition to the UFC. So the WBC was one of those places. So I knew like Scott Adams and them, and they just asked me if I wanted to fight. And, being a UFC veteran, it was easy to get on there. I was like, hell yeah! It was considered like not the UFC. It was like a step down, but I mean they had great fighters, So it was still it was just a little different back then. They had a few tiers. Like you had UFC was a top tier, WBC and like King of the Cake. A couple of those would be like 2 tiers, second tier, and then you had like a lot of local shows or whatever, like 3rd tier. So WBC was definitely one of the best, but it was still not the UFC.
And while being in WC, did you expect like maybe I might be like signed with them full time, or did you always think, oh, I'm gonna go back to the UFC?
Oh no, I was always wanting to. I mean, like I said, the WEC was, like I said, it was really just something to do in between fights. And when they offered you a fight, you always sitting there and waiting for the UFC call. And we didn't get it. You're like, oh, screw it, I'll make this. I'll fight for the WEC. And I remember before I had a WEC fight signed, and then UFC called me, and I just called Scott Adams like, hey man, they did. He's like, oh, absolutely, man, go to the UFC. So I mean, they were cool with it. They were just. He knew, because otherwise nobody would sign a fight with him. If you would let you out of the contract, go fight with the UFC. And like I said, but back then it was really weird because the UFC for a while, like they only wanted, like the 170 was kind of the lightest weight class they had a title for. They put some 55-pound fights on, but they were almost getting away from it in a way. They didn't have anybody at 45 or 35. That was unheard of. So that 170. They put some 55-pounders on, but then 85, 205, and heavyweight was it. So a lot of the good fighters at 155 and lower, they were all in the WEC. I mean, that was kind of as big of an organization as I got for them because UFC wasn't putting that much on at like 155. They put some on, but then they kind of got away from it. So the UFC started putting a little bit more on, but that's when they decided to purchase, WEC and just put all those guys on there because they were starting to put on more fights. And when they're putting on more fights, they didn't have, it's like you only had so many fighters at 170, 185. So they're like, we need more fighters. We're putting on more fights. All of a sudden, we got more funding. This is becoming popular. We need more fighters. So then they opened it up to 155, 145, 135-pound weight classes. So they had to get to WEC.
No, yeah, that's totally true. I remember the early days when they removed your, weight classes, where BJ Penn had to bounce, around other companies till they brought it back.
Yep. Different times, man.
Oh, yeah, totally different. One thing I want to talk about, you fought some, the likes of Matt Hughes, Matt Serra, Brown, the list goes on. A fight I wanted to talk about, how was it, facing Matt Serra? You did lose to him the first time I split, and then you got your revenge on him and got the win on that.
Yeah, be honest with you, one of my favorite people in the sport is Matt Serra. You know what I mean? So I never really, I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy fighting the guy, because, you don't really want to fight your friends that much. I like him, I respect him, especially the first time. Ton on the line, it was just about whoever won that got to win the Ultimate Fighter Championship, won a bunch of money, and got a fight with St. Pierre. So I definitely wanted to win that one. Ended up losing a split decision, and that was it for me. And then Joe Silva asked if I'd fight him again. I was like, I'll fight anybody, man. I don't care. Didn't really necessarily want to do it, but I did it. It was at that point, I felt like I think I'd won like 2 or 3 in a row, and I was just wanting to keep going and try and, work my way to get that title. So I told him I'd fight whoever, and that's who he offered me. So it is what it is. But, Matt was a great fighter. Matt Hughes, obviously, fighting him was great. Matt Brown, I fought him a couple of times. He's tough as nails. I feel like especially early in the days, it just seemed like everybody they gave you was just tough, man. There wasn't that many like I said, there was only a handful of fighters, and everybody was unbelievably tough. Yeah. I really wouldn't trade that for the world, man. You know, a lot of the best guys in the world I got to go in there and go against.
Of course. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I also want to talk about like with your first fight and then you're in Ultimate Fighter. What was that like, and what was like the experience being in the house over there?
Well, my first fight was against Pete Spratt, and like I said, luckily I'd already fought him once to get in UFC, or back in the UFC, and so when it came our team's turn, they were like, what do you think, Chris? It's like, well, man, I already fought Pete Spratt, and I already beat him once, so if we, like, it was all about keeping control of the picks, because if your team won, you get to pick who fought next week. So I was like, all right, I think we can keep control. If I can fight this guy, I've already beat him once. I don't see why I wouldn't beat him again. And then we'll keep control. So they're like, all right. So they set that up. But I'll be honest, like, I was trying to be smart then. Like, Pete was a hell of a fighter on his feet. So I was like, I ain't going to try to fight this guy on his feet. I'm going to try to take him down and submit him right away. I know that's his weakness. So it's all about me getting my win quick without getting cut open, and my team keeping, the power. So that was my goal. That's what I did. Now, as far as being in the house was, I absolutely loved it. Now, I know a lot of people complain about, like, man, this sucks, I don't have my phone, I don't have a TV. I'm just like, dude, remember me and Matt Sarah sitting there like, who gives a shit about that stuff? It was like, this is and be honest with you, this is the only time in my career that I ever got to train like everybody else. Every other time, like, I live in Indianapolis, I have 4 kids. I've been a fireman for almost 20 years. Like, I was always doing that stuff, and I would train like I should have, I trained every day I could. But I didn't get to just live, eat, sleep, and breathe fighting. So when I was there, that's what I did, I got to train twice a day, 7 days a week. I got to work out with, those guys, some of the best guys in the world. That's all I want to do, I was like, this is awesome. I don't care if I don't have a TV, I don't want to watch TV. I don't care if I don't have any music, whatever. I mean, this is the best opportunity for me right now. And I had a good time, so I think a lot of people, maybe they get to do that anyway. So they didn't appreciate it as much as I did, but I loved it. I thought it was a great opportunity for me to, just get better.
And like while being there, and then also because you're training, your goal is to win the tournament, but also it's a TV show also. Was there a way, like, did they always tell you while there's cameras that you had to act a certain way for ratings and stuff like that?
Man, you know what? They never really did. They just let us do our thing. Luckily we had some pretty entertaining people on there. Matt Sarah's a riot, fun to hang out with, and it was always pretty good. Luckily for us, I thought our fights were always pretty entertaining. A lot of them with the distance and everything. So I mean, you have an hour-long show. Really only got like 42 minutes of stuff, and you got I don't know, probably 15, 16, 18 minutes where you're talking about the fight. So you only have 20-something minutes to fill their time to show training, weigh-ins, all that. So I think they didn't have, the point is they didn't have to tell us to do stuff, because if all the fights are over in the first round, they're like, shit, we need some filler time. You guys got to do something. But I mean, our guys, I think, were funny enough, and we did enough, and it was just it was we didn't have to be told anything. I've never heard of them really trying to dictate. Now, I will tell you this: they love it when people are drinking alcohol and acting like fools. For example, you could run out of toilet paper or something. You go get on the little bat phone they have. They're like, "Hey man, we need toilet paper." And they'd be like, we'll bring it in when we get a chance. Might be 10 minutes. But if you were like, "Hey man, we're out of vodka," you can't even get the K out in vodka and the bottle in there. Hey,
Wow.
who needs vodka? They want that. You know what I mean? But they don't say, "Hey, why don't you go drink some vodka?" They don't do it like that.
No, that's awesome. We're always, thinking about that too. Every season of The Ultimate Fighter is always some fight breaking out of hand, and it's, results of, drinking.
Oh yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Luckily for me, I was on the one called The Comeback. Everybody there had already been in the UFC before, so we were all kind of established veterans who had, like, I think 30 years old, so I'm already set in who I am as a person, and I didn't know how to train. I wasn't out here just trying to make a name for myself. I wasn't out there who was a young, inexperienced kid, just trying to show off on TV. I mean, we weren't like that. I mean, if it would have been like that, there would have been some serious problems with if I had people who were acting like immature punks. I mean, there might have been some fights. We were all cool. You know, everybody's just like, hey, I'm here for one reason only. I want to get a shot at that title. You know, that was why I wanted to be there. You know, like I said, I already had 4 kids at the time, and I didn't want to go spend 7 weeks away from my family. You know what I mean? It was like, but I was willing to do it to try and, you know, accomplish my goal. But it wasn't just to go out there and get drunk and act like a fool. Like, I didn't really drink at all on the show, man. I was like, man, I still got fights coming up, you know? When I got off the show, yeah, we went out and partied, but I mean, before they're like, no, man, I mean, I'm not partying while I have fights up. I mean, I have strict rules for my fight camp. Like, 6 weeks out, I'll never have a drink of alcohol, you know? So I'm just not going to do it while I'm in this house. That's crazy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, also, like, while being in the house, was there a way to be in still contact with your family? Did they let you call them?
That was the deal when we went out there. Said, we're going to let you call your family once a week. Well,
oh, wow.
I think after the second week that Jimmy Jackson got in trouble, like jumped a fence and went and met up with some girl. And then after that, Danny came and he yelled at everybody, kicked Jeremy off. And our punishment was we never got to talk to our family again. And I was like,
oh, wow.
What does that have to do with me? You know, I didn't jump the fence. Why are we punishing me for what he did? So that kind of sucked, but I mean, it is what it is. So I think I have to talk to my family once or twice. But besides that, no.
And also being there, what was like the most important like lesson did you get from being in that whole experience with Ultimate Fighter?
Man, I mean, to be honest with you, just seeing how everybody trained. You know, I've always been in Indianapolis. I've always trained here. You know, I mean, I wasn't even doing, like, plyometric workouts or anything. I remember first day I'm in there, like, we're doing plyometrics. They're like, all right, plyometrics. And I'm like, plyometrics? What are these things you speak of? And they're just like, you don't do plyometrics? I'm like, no. Like, how did you even make it this far? So I'm like, I don't know, man. So I just learned a lot of new training techniques. I learned how to, I think, train more like a true professional mixed martial artist, you know. And before, to be honest with you, it was like, I was just like the caveman, just rubbing 2 stones together trying to make fire. They showed me how to use match. You know, I didn't really – I knew my way because it was just like old school toughness, but I didn't really understand the better techniques of doing stuff, and I learned a lot about that. So it was just good to understand how, you know, the big camps, you know, American Top Team, all those other people, how they were training, how they did stuff. And I learned that there.
Oh yeah, most definitely. One fight I want to, you know, fast forward. How was your fighting experience, you know, with Dan Hardy? I remember watching that fight and with Alex, and watching that fight was amazing. And I even got emotional. I remember your kids, you know, were in the octagon with you. How was that feeling?
Man, that was awesome because, to be honest with you, right, like I was really trying to do well to make it to my title run. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'd won 4 in a row, and then, you know, I lost one before that, and I'd hurt my knee, and so I ended up having to rehab it for a little bit, and that was like the first time really I can ever think of that I didn't go to the gym every day. You know what I mean? After, like I said, I learned how to work hard there, and I learned you had to do certain things if I wanted to be competing at that level. Well, this was the time I hurt my knee, so I had to take like a couple weeks off. And I went to my son's basketball game and my daughter's gymnastics meet and cheerleading. I was like, man. So then I start feeling this thing I never felt before, this guilty feeling about me not, you know, I had kids in high school and middle school, you know, and all of a sudden I realized every day, you know, I'd go to the basketball game like, oh, what are you doing here, Chris? And I was like, oh, man, I felt bad. Like I wasn't being a good dad. So they asked me to fight Dan Hardy. I said, yes, absolutely. I'm all fired up. And I go to the gym that day, and I started feeling this extreme guilt. You know, I was like, man, my son has a basketball game tonight. I should be there. But I didn't know how to – I couldn't be at 2 places at once, you know. And so I felt really guilty. Never had that before. I went home and talked to the wife, and I was like, man, we decided that would just be my last fight, you know. That's what I do. So that gave me my freedom to be able to go to the train every day and still be able to do it and be like, that guilt was gone because, like, I'm going to win my last fight no matter what. So I trained my ass off, and I went, you know, the day before the weigh-ins, I wrote a big letter. I wrote 2. I gave one to Joe Silva, one to Dana White, you know, just thanking him for, you know, his ability to help change me and my family's life, the opportunities that they gave me. And, you know, weigh-ins, I weighed in. I gave him my resignation letter pretty much, and that was it. And went and was able to fight. So, I mean, luckily, another thing that bothered me, too, is, like, I always wanted to fight the way I wanted to fight. And everybody's like, oh, you need to take Dan down. He was too good of a stand-up guy. So, like, kind of pissed me off. I'm like, you act like I think I beat anybody on my stand-up. You act like I can't. So I chose to keep it on my feet the whole time, and then with about a minute left, he shot in on me, and I got to submit him. So I kind of got a really great send-off. I got to win the fight of the night and the sub of the night. Just have a really good end of my career that you don't really get to see many people do. So I was pretty happy to end it like that.
Yeah, that was great. We're going to continue that conversation. Just pause for a second. Looks like there's going to be a part 2 of this interview.
Okay.